Well, it lacked any, it had heat, but that was it. There was no air conditioning.
Yeah.
It had no way to regulate humidity
Uh-huh.
or, deal with the heat. It just got really hot in there in the summer months and wild fluctuations and
Wow.
climatic conditions are just really very hard, especially with a large part of the collection that's wood and leather.
You heard that there. That's the Studebaker Museum's archivist, Andy Beckman, describing some of the reasons why the museum had to move into a new home in 2005. You'll hear all about that next. But first, welcome to Round the Bend Now and Then, a podcast that shines a light on the South Bend and Mishawaka areas past and present. Through interviews with local business owners, leaders, and community members, our listeners and I learn together about all of the great people and great things going on in our community, as we also learn about South Bend and Mishawaka's history and how intertwined our past is with our present. On this week's episode, we try another first. I recorded an entire interview on site away from my basement studio. I felt that would be the best way to authentically shine a spotlight on one of the South Bend and Mishawaka area's gems, the Studebaker Museum. I met with archivist Andy Beckman, and he was so gracious with his time, sharing some history behind the museum and highlighting all of the great things that it has to offer. We met in his office first, where I asked him some questions about the history behind the Studebaker Museum and its various homes over the years, until it landed in its final destination in 2005 at 201 Chapin Street, South Bend, Indiana, 46601. We then hit the museum floor, and Andy describes to us some of the wonderful exhibits, beautiful cars, one-of-a-kind pieces, and tons of historical information telling the story of Studebaker. Now, please know that this episode is not a deep dive into the origins and history of Studebaker, but just know that pretty much everything we discuss in the museum displays that Andy tells us about never would have been there if a few brothers with the last name Studebaker didn't decide to open a blacksmith and wagon building shop in South Bend, Indiana, almost 175 years ago. So hopefully, after listening to the episode, you'll hop up, get in your car, and take the family to the gem that is the Studebaker Museum. Next, before we dive into the museum itself, I ask Andy to tell us a little bit about himself. First, Andy, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, and I just want to spread the good word about the Studebaker Museum. I just think that it's a gem in our community, and I want to highlight it.
Well, thanks for having me and looking forward to our conversation today.
For sure. You want to introduce yourself and just provide a little bit of a background on your kind of your career and how you ended up working here?
Sure. I'm Andrew Beckman. I am the archivist at the Studebaker National Museum, just in the West Washington Historic District in downtown South Bend. I've been at the museum for, pushing a little over 24 years now. And hailed from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to a family of Studebaker owners, and been around Studebakers for most of my entire life.
Wow, what did the museum? Is that what brought you to South Bend, Indiana?
Yeah, they were looking for some additional staff members back around 1999, and
wow,
I applied. They hired me, and the rest, as they say, is history. Yeah.
So from your parents owning Studebakers, it kind of sparked a little love, and then you applied here and started working here, huh?
Yeah, my training, formal training, my degree's in history, and got some postgraduate work at Modern Archives Institute at the National Archives in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And also some other more conservation, more hands-on training at the Campbell Center for Historic Preservation Studies in Mount Carroll, Illinois. Unfortunately, that school is no longer there. Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin has kind of taken the reins for some of their coursework there. But been here for 24 years, and it's been a wonderful time.
That's cool. Next, Andy describes the origins of the Studebaker Museum. Speaking of being here for 24 years, when you look into the history of the Studebaker Museum, it's been quite the journey before ending up here in the little museum district. It's just crazy how it evolved over the years at the different locations. You want to talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, sure. Really, the collection companies vehicle collection began when Clem Studebaker acquired the Lincoln carriage. The carriage President Lincoln took to Ford's Theater the night of his assassination back in the late 1880s. A couple of years later, it was joined by the carriage the Marquis de Lafayette took on his tour of America in 1824. And from there, the Studebakers began really establishing their own museum. They formalized a permanent museum in their new administration building around 1916. And by the time the company closed in South Bend, the collection numbered about 37 vehicles, plus the corporate archives, which was given to the city in 1966.
One thing that I found in my research of the Studebaker Museum is that it took years for it to have a final home. It bounced around from place to place and was a frequent topic of conversation in the newspaper. Folks are passionate about Studebaker, so they're also passionate about preserving Studebaker. We talk about that next. That's about how far my research went back to, was after Studebaker closed, just through newspapers and stuff like that. And it was originally that those cars were originally housed in the Studebaker Administration Building, which turned out being the South Bend Schools Administration Building.
It's been in any number of places. The old Waterworks building where Century Center sits now. For a while, it was out at the old Drury Complex up on Elwood Street up there. And it really had, I would say, its first modern home as part of Discovery Hall at Century Center, which opened in 1977. And Discovery Hall was great, but it was just, they ran out of room almost as soon as the door opened, so they began looking for more space. They moved some vehicles and displays into the former Freeman Spicer building, which later became the more or less
the museum.
Museum. They moved out of Discovery Hall in early 1990s, but we knew the Freeman Spicer building. It's, it had great history. Of course, it was South Bend's dealership, but it was not. The structure was just not suitable for a long-term home for the museum, and that led us to build we still call it the new facility, but going back. Gosh, almost 18 years now.
Crazy.
But opened at the corner of Washington and Chapin in 2005. 55,000 square feet of climate control comfort to display our artifacts and holdings.
He mentioned the Freeman Spicer building there. That was definitely an old building, and it was not suited to house a museum with priceless artifacts. It was located at 530 South Lafayette Boulevard, right near the intersection of Lafayette and South Street. Next, Andy explains why the old building just wasn't suited to house a museum. There was some drama back when they were when it was stored in the Freeman Spicer. I read some articles. It was tough to maintain the collection in there. And there was one article. Councilmen toured the building, and they were in an uproar that all this collection was not being housed right and all that stuff. And so that just kind of added to the reasons to move here. What were some of the things that the environment in that old building that was just not conducive to?
Well, it lacked any, it had heat, but that was it. There was no air conditioning. It had no way to regulate humidity or deal with the heat. It just got really hot in there in the summer months, and wild fluctuations and climatic conditions are just really very hard, especially with a large part of the collection that's wood and leather.
Yes.
It sucks in all the moisture in the summer months, and then it all gets sucked out again as you get to the drier months, and it just wreaks havoc on those artifacts. But thankfully, our new home is more than adequate to provide the proper climate controls for these very invaluable pieces.
Oh, I'm sure. God, yeah, with just those articles they were just talking about during the drama on where to find the new spot. It was basically, look, every year that we hold out in finding a new place is a year less that these cars are kept in good, not just cars, but like you said, the leather and stuff like that. A part of the Studebaker Museum's mission is to be a center for the interpretation of history, design, and innovation that connects and inspires the community and enthusiasts around the world. We talk about the global aspect of it next. I read an article in 1988, and they were already outgrowing the Freeman Spicer building, and Scott Miller was the president of the Studebaker Club, and he said that it's and as soon as they moved into the Freeman Spicer, it was very popular, and that means they almost already had to move. And he said it's an international phenomenon. It's much bigger than anybody would have guessed. He believed that one day it will only be second to Notre Dame as South Bend's biggest tourist attraction. They'll come from all over the world to visit. Wow. He said that 20, 30 years ago, you do have people come from all over the United States and everything like that too, right?
Our audience is global. In fact, we just had some overseas visitors in within the last couple weeks here, and so we walking through the gallery, and you're like, wait a minute, I recognize that language. And we literally have visitors from all over the globe, and especially when the Studebaker Club comes to town for their international meets, and they are truly international affairs. We'll have fellows from Australia, New Zealand come up, a couple of our regulars from Great Britain, and also Germany. I know there's Studebaker owners in Spain because my father many years ago sold a 1937 Studebaker Dictator to a gentleman in Spain, and it's a tremendous following.
Next, I asked Andy who in Studebaker's past would he want to hang out with, and his answer just shows how much Studebaker grew right along with our city. If you could meet anybody from Studebaker's past, who would that be?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'd have to say J.M. Studebaker, because for what he saw within his company, he remembers the blacksmith shop days. He saw the company transition to automobiles. He was presiding over the world's largest wagon manufacturer, factory in the world.
Right.
And he was also plugged in, of course, to local and civic affairs as well. He wasn't just building wagons and buggies the whole time, but just to hear, his witness to so much of South Bend's local history, the growth from when he joined the brothers' firm in the late 1850s up until South Bend being, a major league industrial city in the teens. It's just he was witness to so much, and one of the wealthiest men in town had a grand home just on the east side overlooking the river. And
Sunnyside.
Yep,
is that
Sunnyside. Yeah, I'd love to be able to go walk, take a walk around town with him, and then go maybe have a cup of
an ale with him or something. And imagine that. He saw it go from just podunk little dirt roads and everything to more industry.
When he was not there for the founding. His brothers Henry and Clem took care of that, but he had gone out west to try and find his fortune in the California gold rush. And just the tales from that alone, from the wagon train, heading out there to coming back, he took a ship from, I think it was San Francisco, around the Cape.
Wow.
And then made his way back across the country, from the east. But, the stories he could tell, and I'm sure love to sit there and hear every one of them.
Next, you'll find out why guys and gals who work in museums don't ever want to hear the words earthquake, tornado, hurricane, or even mudslide. What would be a museum curator's worst nightmare?
Natural disaster.
Oh,
I mean, there's only so many things you control in this, on God's green earth, and the weather is not any of them. So.
As we were seeing on the way in here, my minivan's getting pelted with hail.
Yeah. I mean, we do the best we can for things, but, there's, tornado comes through and anything like that. We have disaster plans in place, and we just really hope we never have to use them.
Correct. Knock on major league wood there, boy. I tell you what. Keep knocking on wood. Also keep knocking on wood that the partnership between South Bend and the Studebaker Museum stays strong. And also that kind-hearted folks keep donating. What's the main way that the Studebaker Museum receives funding?
Well, our biggest partner is the city of South Bend. When the collection was given to the city back in 1966, they still that is still part of the city's property. So they are really our biggest partner in the museum business here. We also have any number of fundraising events. We have museum's endowment, and of course, standard things like admissions and museum store sales and things like that. But it's always, any small museum will tell you there's constantly the struggle to you want to be on firm financial footing as possible, and we always certainly rely on the generosity of others. And,
awesome.
We're more than happy to accept people's checks.
And I will be more than happy to put the website in the show notes and on social media and all that stuff.
Appreciate that very much.
Next, Andy and I talk about the inseparable combination of classic cars and donuts. Any future events coming up? Anything coming up? Like you just had the one a few weeks ago on the lawn here. Are there anything else coming up?
Yeah, we always have a number of things on the horizon. We do our Cars and Coffee event the second Saturday of the month right down here at the museum. Okay. So folks can come down with their vintage vehicles and get a cup of Joe and a Krispy Kreme donut.
Nice.
Socialize amongst the other car faithful. It's really a neat event. We've been pushing, I think we even topped 100 cars at our last one.
Just on the second Saturday of the month? 100
just
cars?
on Saturday.
That's neat.
Saturday morning, and it's always a different. You never know what's going to show up.
Yeah, that's cool. When's the next one?
That'll be coming up second Saturday in August, which is I look at my calendar here.
I think.
Yeah, August 12th.
Awesome.
Yeah, starts at 8, wraps up at 10. Like I said, coffee and donuts and some good
classic
car
cars. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a Studebaker.
No, we've had everything. We had a. What was that? I think we had a Farmall B tractor show up one time.
So just that's neat though. That's really cool.
Yeah, I know. We were happy to see it. Certainly livened up the whole place.
That's cool. Next, we hit the museum floor at the lower level gallery. And you'll hear that I'm not too good at adding up minutes.
Our lower level gallery tells a story from the blacksmith shop days, the Studebaker family's early years as blacksmiths, learning the trade from their father, up to the 1920s, early 1930s. You kind of take it up to the receivership in 1933, but you see the basis from horse-drawn vehicles, transition to automobiles. We have a number of special record-setting Studebakers. One of my favorites is the number 6 Studebaker Commander Roadster. It set a new record in 1928, traveling 25,000 miles in less than 23,000 minutes.
Holy moly!
So I'll put you on the spot here. Let's see how your mental math is. Okay. How long is 23,000 minutes? How many days is that?
Holy moly! 60 minutes in an hour, 6 times. Oh gosh, months?
It's a little over, it's about 16, 17 days or so.
Okay. Yeah.
So that particular car in 1928 averaged 65 miles an hour for 16 days straight. It was just Studebaker secured a track in Atlantic City, New Jersey. They sent out 3 cars and they were told complete 25,000 miles as quickly as possible.
Right.
The Commander Roadster, the number 6 car, it finished first. And the clock was running the entire time for driver changes, for refueling. Okay. The biggest thing was the tires. Tire technology wasn't as good.
Right.
Back
Nor
then.
was road technology.
And they circled the track and 65 miles an hour for 16 plus days straight back in 1928. That's really a testament to durability.
Hands down, that is. Wow. The Studebaker Museum is much more than just displays of a few pretty-looking cars. It's also full of pictures and print that tells many more stories about the company. Next, you'll hear how South Bend's biggest celebrity was connected to Studebaker.
So many tie-ins with local history as well. Newt Rockne, of course, the Notre Dame football coach. He was also a Studebaker employee beginning in 1928. He worked for the sales.
Advertisements or for...
Yeah, well, also he was kind of like a celebrity spokesperson, if you will.
Yeah.
In the off season, he had more detailed responsibility. I believe his title was like a vice president of something. But he would go out and represent Studebaker at trade shows and industry functions.
Wow.
In 1932, the Studebaker introduced a new car called the Rockne, named after the coach, who unfortunately died in a plane crash in March of 1931.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe there's talks he was thinking about leaving coaching to actually join the automobile business. Who knows how that would have played out?
Next, Andy describes what he said are some people's favorite exhibit. And when you're standing next to this exhibit, you can definitely feel the historical significance. All right. Well, when we were inside your office talking, you mentioned some of the presidential carriages. Man, and we are standing in front of, about 5 of them right now.
Yeah, the world's largest collection of presidential carriages. The Studebaker built carriages are the McKinley Phaeton and President Harrison's Brougham.
Okay.
The non-Studebakers, but still no less important to our telling this presidential carriage story. The President Lincoln's barouche he took to Ford's Theater the night of his assassination. The Landau that President Grant used during his term in office. And even though we realize the Marquis de Lafayette was not a president, but still very important in the formation of our country. And the Revolutionary War, we felt his carriage, the oldest piece in our collection dating back to 1824, deserves a place on the floor with the rest of them.
So his is the oldest piece here?
Yeah, that's our oldest piece in the collection.
Now, I'm sure that most folks, when they think of Studebaker, they think of automobiles. But the automobile plant wasn't built in South Bend until the 1920s. Prior to that, Studebaker in South Bend was big in the horse and buggy game.
And you think of the horse and buggy days, but Studebaker built over 400 different styles of horse-drawn equipment, from the basic farm wagon that farmers would use in the fields to we have an extension front station wagon, and that was the antecedent of the modern day family truckster station wagon. Yeah. But at that time, it meant taking people from the train station. It's got room for luggage, and
I see,
for transfer, folks to the hotel or their
like
homes.
A shuttle, literally.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, very much like the courtesy shuttle at the the DoubleTree downtown. Construction wagons. We have our dump wagon here as well, the forerunner of the modern day dump truck. Sleighs. We have fun around the holidays saying Santa drives a Studebaker. Who's to say he doesn't?
Well, he does, especially the South Bend Santa.
And then, of course, the little buggies, the 2 passenger buggies, that people like you and me were probably going to the Studebaker showroom to buy.
Next, Andy describes the current feature exhibit.
So our current feature exhibit is Mid-Century Master, the designs of Brooks Stevens.
Okay.
And Brooks Stevens was an industrial designer, just as that field was gaining a foothold in the 30s and 40s. That's when he was coming of age and really he thought his future lay in design work. And he really became one of the important players in what we call now mid-century modern.
Okay.
But things as diverse as the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. We have an Evinrude outboard motor, Harley Davidson Hydroglide from 1949. His agency did some design work for that, and also his automotive works. The Willys Overland Jeepster from right after World War II.
Classic Jeep grill there.
And he had some other one-off designs too. The Paxton Phoenix, a one-of-a-kind car. You're not going to see one anywhere else because this is the only one.
That is one of a kind.
And he was retained by Studebaker in the early 1960s to help redesign some of their products. And the 1962 line, the Gran Turismo Hawk, the restyled Larks, up through the 1964 models came off of the drawing boards from the guys at Brooks Stevens Associates.
Next, we're standing in the area that houses post-World War II cars, and Andy describes how they are Studebaker's most iconic.
But Studebaker's post-war designs are really their most iconic. We mentioned the Bullet Nose, the Avanti, the 53 Starliner. These are hallmarks of automotive design and still resonate very strongly with people today. I mean, with today's safety standards and other requirements, designers don't quite have the freedom they did back in the 50s.
I see.
And don't get me wrong. I'm all for having a safe automobile.
Of course.
Our cars are so much better than they were before, but still we lost a bit of just the style and what you could do to make a car distinct from another automobile.
There's this big steel-looking car at the museum, and turns out that was made by another one of South Bend's early industrialists. He goes into that next, and then describes other one-of-a-kind cars that the museum displays.
And we have several one-of-a-kind vehicles as well, aside from the Stevens prototypes we just mentioned. The Bendix car, the only automobile to bear the Bendix name, and it's even...
Really?
They created a fictitious corporation, the Steel Wheel Corporation, to manufacture this automobile.
Studebaker created a fictitious...
Bendix did.
Oh,
Actually,
Bendix
this
did.
was produced by Bendix.
Okay.
Really to showcase all the products Bendix made for the auto industry.
I see.
And it was just the one. It languished around in various Bendix buildings and actually came to us just after the museum opened in 2005. The prototype 1947 Studebaker Champion Deluxe Station Wagon, nicknamed the Woody for obvious reasons. They made only one. You're looking at it right there. The Packard Predictor, the show car for the 1956 auto show circuit. Many consider that to be the last Packard, as the company was really phasing out by that time.
Okay.
But again, a one-off creation, hand-built by the folks over at Ghia Coachworks in Italy. And again, a miracle that these all survived to the present day.
Wow,
'Cause so many times,
one-offs.
the show cars, when they were done with them, they would just get scuttled and scrapped, but the Predictor survived, and we're so happy it did.
One of my favorite vehicles there is the South Bend Fire Department fire truck. Next, Andy talks about how Studebaker used to produce vehicles like this. I see you have the South Bend Fire Department fire truck there. That's neat.
Yeah, that's another aspect of Studebaker history. Their commercial vehicle line was, very strong for a lot of years, and they produced chassis for fire trucks. And that was sold into St. Joe, Michigan, and went through another private hands. But the folks at St. Joseph County, or the South Bend Fire Department, their firefighters union, was really instrumental in helping us get the restoration. So we thought we should recognize their contribution.
Yeah, that's cool.
With
so
delivery.
That wasn't necessarily here in South Bend, but it's just...
No, that was not an actual South Bend truck, although they had some that were very similar.
Similar. Police cars, too, I think, Studebaker.
Yeah, we have a Studebaker police car, not on display right now, but number of those. We have the very last Studebaker automobiles as well, the last regular production South Bend car, a 1964 Daytona hardtop, and the last Studebaker ever, a 1966 Cruiser, which came off the line St. Patty's Day, 1966.
I'm a lifelong fan of Bonnie Doon's mint chip ice cream. My grandpa Geyer used to pile my cousins and us in the car in the early to mid 1980s and take us there, as long as we didn't get any of that on his seats. But at the Studebaker Museum, they also pay homage to Bonnie Doon's as well. And then, of course, we got the old Bonnie Doon's, a South Bend icon, little presentation there with a drive-up. Yeah,
we wanted to really kind of give it some local flavor. And every town had its little drive-in restaurants. And in my hometown in Wisconsin, it was Late's Drive-In. And still there to this day, best hamburgers I've ever had. And, of course, in South Bend, we had Bonnie Doon.
Mm-hmm.
And a new arrival, actually, was the Bonnie Doon Special, a midget racer from the late 1940s.
Wow.
As this form of racing, it's very inexpensive to go racing in this form, but they used the Studebaker Champion 6 engine was a very popular power plant. They were cheap, they could rev, and they held together. And they powered the midget racers. The Bonnie Doon Special raced around South Bend. This car...
that thing raced around South Bend, huh?
Yeah. In fact, the track down at Playland Park.
Really?
That would race down there. Actually, the car was very successful.
Wow.
As it often happens, they kept rebuilding car. The guys restored this car. They pulled it out of a junkyard in Elkhart, they told me. And
no way.
Restored in the 80s. It was in private hands, and we were just able to reacquire that back about a year and a half ago.
That's some history there. I mean, just, connecting to the Playland here in South Bend, the Bonnie Doons. I mean, that is just definitely, that's all South Bend right there. That is neat. That is cool. Now, there are 3 floors to the Studebaker Museum. Next, we take a trip to the basement, which also has vehicles on display. Andy talks about some of the military connections that Studebaker had. All right, so now we are downstairs in the basement. You want to talk about this area down here?
This is our visible storage areas. We have our vehicles that are not on interpreted display, and it's we can only display so many things at one time. And honestly, you got to change it up so people can come back and see something new. And we also have our military exhibits down in the basement. People can learn about Studebaker's military history. The first use of Studebaker vehicles in armed conflict was the Mormon War in 1857. Not one of the more
not one of the more common wars that we
more
learn
well-known
about.
Skirmishes, but at that time Studebaker was still pretty small potatoes. So the Milburn Company in Mishawaka had a contract to supply the United States Army. They couldn't quite do it, so they sublet some work to the Studebakers, who were more than happy to pitch in. And Studebaker also supplied some wagons for the Civil War, and really every armed conflict from there up until Vietnam. Studebaker was producing military equipment of one kind or another.
That's nuts.
And you see a lot of World War I era vehicles. World War I was still very much fought with horse-drawn equipment, but then mechanized equipment came for World War II. Studebaker was building Army trucks, B-17 airplane engines, the Wright Cyclone R-1820 built under license, and also the Weasel, which was a Studebaker exclusive, a tracked vehicle that could go where the Jeep couldn't. And
they
built
did both, right? Water and
they had the
land.
amphibious models, and
Not many people equate the Muppets with Studebaker, but in 1979, that changed. Then right there is the world famous Muppet car, right?
Indeed, we are delighted to have the Muppet car, a 1951 Commander that was in 1979's Muppet movie, and they had two cars for the filming, and this particular car was the one they used to show Fozzie and Kermit driving. So it was actually modified so it could be driven from the trunk.
You can see the steering wheel.
The steering and controls back there. They shot a camera out the front feeding a monitor in the trunk so the guy could see where he was going. And I can only imagine that was incredibly unpleasant. But,
yes.
But you would never know it. We're delighted to have the Muppet car here, and that's a vehicle that transcends Studebaker. I mean, we're up in the 70s. We're almost 20 years past the South Bend shutdown, but again, Studebaker is once again at the forefront.
And we're just looking for folks to help restore it too, right?
Indeed. I think we still have the GoFundMe page on there. They can check us out there. And
sounds good.
If they want to send us a check, we won't turn that down either.
Nope. Next, we wrap up our jaunt around the museum and talk about something that you really have to see to believe.
See, another one of our feature exhibits going on right now is the photography of Anthony Schmidt. Anthony Schmidt is a young man who, on the Asperger's autism spectrum, has really found a passion for photography.
Wow.
And everything you see as part of the exhibit is forced perspective photography. These are all models set against actual backgrounds. And when we were hanging this exhibit,
these are model cars that these pictures are taken of?
It's truly amazing. We see some of the, kind of behind the curtain there, how he actually sets us up with these elaborate dioramas. Particular one we're looking at here is over like an ocean scene, but he's got a little tabletop with, sand to replicate a beach, and it's absolutely fascinating, and never fails to. I find myself stopping staring at this every time I come to the office.
I'm dead serious, folks. Like, you have to see this. There are pictures that look like real cars and real beach scenes and wood scenes, and they are models. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's going to be going on. In fact, Anthony and his mother are going to be coming for a program here at the museum. I believe that's on August 4th, and as soon as curator Kyle comes out of his office here, I'm going to... Hey, Kyle, tell us about the Anthony Schmidt program coming up on August 4th. It is on August 4th, isn't it?
August 4th, I believe. What's that, a Friday? So we'll be hosting Anthony and his mother here. We're really excited. It's a live in-person program. He'll talk about his work, his progress. We have a employee from Logan Center talking about what their work. That will be in conversation with Anthony. It's going to be a really terrific program. If you're in South Bend or even around South Bend that day, please come by. Tickets are, I think, on sale now. So what time is it? 5:30, doors open.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kyle Sater, everybody, curator, Studebaker National Museum.
Definitely check that out, folks. Friday, August 4th at 5 o'clock. And if you can't make it then, you still need to check out Anthony's photography on display. I mean, it is truly amazing that what you see are models and not real life. The young man definitely has a passion and a talent. We talk about that next. How did Anthony Schmidt hook up with Studebaker? Like, how does that happen?
He has a passion for Studebakers as well. He actually owns a 1960 Hawk.
The kid does?
Yeah.
Nice.
The Hawk is around here somewhere in one of the pictures, but yeah, his stuff is really, if you just Google Anthony Schmidt photography, it just pops up. I mean, his stuff was getting tremendous amounts of coverage. And we saw the Studebaker tie. It was just a natural fit. So
wow.
A few phone calls and a couple Zoom meetings, and we were able to put this together, and just delighted to be able to feature this.
That's neat. That is so cool. We wrap up our conversation with me asking Andy why folks should come to the Studebaker Museum. Hey, so why should folks come on down to the Studebaker Museum?
Well, it's, why shouldn't they come down to the Studebaker National Museum? There's so many things to offer down here. We talked about the Super Service Center for the young people. You can trace the history of transportation through the products of the Studebaker Corporation and its ancestors, from 2 men in a blacksmith shop to the world's leader in horse-drawn transportation to the transition to automobiles. and even the electric cars that are all the rage today. Studebaker was building electrics beginning in 1902.
Wow.
Some of this country's most stylish automobiles came out the doors of the Studebaker Corporation. And all of this from, a company right here in South Bend, Indiana. It's something we're, should be tremendously proud of.
Absolutely.
A city of industry, a city that, and it's also a story of resiliency, because Studebaker could have folded at any number of times, whether it's the demise of their original market, the horse-drawn vehicle, to they barely survived the Great Depression. They entered receivership in 1933. They had a number of brushes with insolvency, between those times as well, but they came back time after time. And, yes, it's a shame that Studebaker closed when they did, but the company had a great run of over 100 years in the business, which, there's not many names that can hang in there for a century with those things thrown at them. So that's a true lesson. And also, not just Studebaker, but lesson of a city, the Rust Belt of industrial cities in America. It's a story many times over. You can take out the name South Bend and insert anything from
anything else.
Detroit, Youngstown, Ohio, anything you care to name. But, South Bend didn't just shrug their shoulders and, accept defeat. They rallied. They came around by, just a couple of years after Studebaker closed the South Bend plant. The unemployment rate in South Bend was back below pre-closing levels.
Really?
So we say the recovery was quick. The healing would take much longer.
I see. Yeah.
But again, South Bend rebounded. They rolled up their sleeves. They got to it. They, it's certainly a difficult time, but you look at where we are in 2023. The future is bright.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. I hope that the last 40 minutes or so convinced you why you should visit the Studebaker Museum. I want to thank those at the Studebaker Museum for the opportunity to come and spend time there and learn more about the museum. A special thanks to Andy Beckman. Andy, thank you so much for your time and knowledge. I learned a ton. Your passion shines as you talk about the museum and Studebaker. As always, please be sure to share the podcast with those that you think would like it. Follow us on all the social media channels, Twitter, @RoundTheBendPod, Facebook, Round the Bend Now and Then. Join us again next time as we learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's Now and Then.